Well, on a couple of next logical points. That is, the whole issue, if this is going to occur, and I believe it is, what we're looking at is a tide, the way the tide is moving, without throwing in too many opinions. But the issue I'd like to look at next is the question of gearing up food production systems to feed the cities, and at the same time facing up to the facts of rural depopulation throughout Latin America. Or alternatively, if we were to bring this issue up again, I'd concentrate these issues in an area where they are felt the strongest, where the severity is the greatest. Where would that be? Mexico and Central America. After all, what do you think this illegal Mexican issue to the United States is really all about? It's concerned with employment. And I'll leave you with that teaser. I can pursue it if I get a question on that. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Fox will now take any questions if there are any audience.
Sir.
Yeah, and you talked about decentralization, and you talked about generation of employment in future in cities, and you talked about the dilemma in terms of where do you decentralize. And the policy in this country has been since Second World War, where more resources were to be put in the urban sector, which was the modern sector. And the dilemma I really have with the kind of speech you gave us is there was a policy over a long time where the urban centers were seen as the driving force of the development of the country. And we see the product of that policy today.
I'm sorry, I'm confusing Latin America with the U.S. here.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the U.S., I'm talking
all right.
about U.S. policy,
all right.
development, of which you somewhat alluded to. Here we see today that the development policies that were encouraged in the 40s, in the 50s, and 60s have taken us to a disaster today, and you mentioned that. And you said these governments are not willing to decentralize, and you mentioned the point where there's really nowhere to decentralize.
Yeah.
What other conclusions do you come up with, if we have got all these dilemmas,
Yeah, well.
What do you suggest?
Well, the first thing I do is we suggest we throw the we out and realize that these are their problems. It is not the U.S. pursuit of U.S. policies in Latin America that's led to this. You might identify the Economic Commission for Latin America in the previous thesis in the 1950s, that the answer for Latin America at that time was industrialization in order to achieve import substitution. But what did happen was that, like a snowball rolling down the hill, it caught on, and it got faster and growed like Topsy, and here they are. Yes, they're in a heck of a dilemma. I throw decentralization in there almost parenthetically, but if we look at industrialization and city growth and the whole taking of the rural population out of the rural sector, this is the situation they're in. This is true. Where do they go from here? Well, the first thing they have done, and this has been going on now, it was a new buzzword 5 years ago, and then it was another buzzword 4 years ago. The last one was, I think, agro-industries. It was marvelous. It lasted 6 months, and then women in development came in substitution. But the whole idea was, yes, we've got to do something to revitalize the rural sector. This is now in vogue throughout Latin America. Okay? Now, let's see where their investments go. Now, this has come about largely because of the oil question. Why? Because countries realized how vulnerable they were to this the energy issue. Prices shot up, and they say to themselves, well, we are systemically vulnerable on this issue. The next issue to hit us is that of food production. We have got to achieve self-sufficiency in food production. This has been one reason. It has led country after country to consider very actively the issue of rural revitalization. Mexico, for example, has a program now 2 years old. It's called the, something agropecuario, SAM is the acronym, Agropecuario Mexicano, self-sufficiency in agricultural goods in any case. They are beginning to stir to come to life on this issue. Now, I'll answer a question you didn't ask. How are they going to do it? What I see is a constant stream of migrants in countries where there is a population to continue migrating, coming into the cities. The subsistence agriculturalist, he's going to keep coming. Nothing has ever reached him anyway. Why should he bother? And on the other hand, what are the national authorities going to do? It strikes me in general that they're going to head toward, given the exigencies of the moment, increasing food production, they're going to head toward commercial agriculture. This is what I see. They know they don't have 2 and 3 generations to train farmers to change the whole culture, as it were. Huh? They're going to take the easy road out, provide subsidies, drop the tariffs on the importation of tractors, as it were. But fine, whether this is successful or not, I don't know. But my point is that I expect to still see migration from the countryside. Now, I hope I got to your question. Did I?
No, I don't think we are touching the core of the problem. When I said we are all concerned, that's why we are here talking about it. And the question is, since you are involved in the United States government.
No, let me make that, no, I'm not. I'm an international civil servant, as though I worked with the United Nations. I'm not at all with the U.S. government. Does it have bearing on your question?
My question is, you really didn't address, you gave us an outline of the population question. You did not tell us the underpinnings of why people are moving to the cities, and because it's not only a population problem, it's a historical problem at the time they were feasible.
Yeah.
Why the rural areas were underdeveloped.
I'll tell you what, if you invite me back next year, I'll tackle that issue, okay? And I will prepare and title the speech accordingly. Can I have another question? Ma'am?
Could you describe in greater detail the condition of the city under this population pressure right now? For instance, how is Mexico City handling the doubling of population within such a short period of time? How are social services, educational services, and things of that kind being handled?
I can answer to some of that, yes. The mayor of Mexico City is Hank Gomez. He'd like to throw up his hands from time to time. Let's just take a look at one issue there, potable water in Mexico City. We've gotten to this point in a place of 15 million people where they're taking water out of the ground faster than it's being replenished. All right, this much we know. But much more importantly, the sewerage is beginning to contaminate the aquifer below Mexico City. It's gotten to this point. Now, in order to recharge the ground supplies, Mexico is building a pipeline from I think it's 200-300 kilometers away, to I don't know the name of the lake, bringing water up over the valley of Toluca, which is higher than the Valley of Mexico, down into the Valley of Mexico. Now, one of the costs here is that it will be using something like 8% of the available energy in the country to do this, to pull this off. The cost is in the billions. And it's estimated that that will buy roughly 4 to 5 years additional population growth when completed. That's the magnitude of issues we're dealing with. Now, one thing you read about constantly in Mexican newspapers is a deterioration of levels of living among the population in Mexico City. The whole question of kids, it's not so much not getting enough to eat, but the right kinds of things to eat. In the rural sector, another generation had a fallback position. They don't in Mexico City. You see and you read of potable water being brought in by trucks to districts in Mexico City, where, from their point of view, it costs an arm and a leg. They've got to buy water. I don't know that I really could go further. These are some issues that I know about. Sir?
Who owns most of the rural land that is titled? Is that owned by those who have migrated to the city and continue to own the land in the country, or is most of the land in the hands of the farmers?
It would depend on the country, one, but I think you're helping me with your question. The answer I gave you, we're discussing here, is yes. There's an awful lot of migration to the cities, leaving somebody behind for insurance on the plot of land, which is land in usufruct in many cases, fee simple owned. There's an awful lot of this coming and going. Stand by the city's edge, whatever city in Latin America, on a Sunday morning and watch them, Saturday morning, stream out on the buses, and then stream back with bags filled with meat, with bread, what have you, Sunday evenings. Yes, this is an insurance policy for an awful lot of people. And in addition, there's an awful lot of commuting, daily commuting, not just middle and upper classes in Latin America. You can see this daily, coming and going from 30 miles away into the city to work. Gee, if this were off the record, maybe I can discuss it. Above the rim of La Paz, where the capital of Bolivia, I was out about 5 years ago looking at a World Bank project. And they were touting, this project was really being touted as a success. And I left the room where we were being briefed and went outside and asked one of the women where the men were. And she told me, and mind you, this was a model village. They were in town working in La Paz. They had to eat after all. It's 30 miles away.
I have two questions. I think they may be related. One, we're talking about the commercialization of agriculture, where the farms may be bigger and they might get into export crops. Is there any evidence that as this is happening, there is pressure in some of the countries to have a progressive income tax to take some of that money and redistribute it in some sort of social, equitable way?
I would like to answer your question. I don't have the training to. I honestly don't. I couldn't begin. I'd just lead you astray.
Okay, the other question, or thing dealing with food price, is there any evidence that any of the governments of Latin America are seeing that they have to get away from the policy of cheap food, which is good for the city people, but disastrous for the rural countryside, and make it a better deal for the people to stay on the land by the way they manipulate the buying and selling of your food products?
Yeah, well, if you've been in Latin America, any time you go to the market, you realize that those prices in the urban centers are tightly controlled. Market after market. There's a certain limit, and that's it. The only answer I can give you is from recent trips down there. The complaints I hear that prices are skyrocketing. Whether those skyrocketing food prices are having the added benefit of producing an income differentially greater, accounting for inflation and what have you, to the rural sector, I don't know, but I do believe so. Again, it's a country-by-country situation. There's a whole field of study there. I believe that is beginning to happen, particularly in Argentina. I know that's happening. Sir?
Well, but to bring this a bit closer to home, could you speak to the relationship between population pressure in Mexico and Mexican immigration into this country?
Well, if we accept the premise that the immigration issue, illegal immigration issue, is largely a labor force supply-demand issue, then we can look at the following scenario. Mexico's population is 70 million. It has one of the lowest labor force participation rates in the world. Hey, where is it written you got to work, huh? You know, it's just a cultural thing, okay? Those in the labor force, roughly 29%, what is that in absolute terms? Let's say, for the sake of argument, some 20 million in the labor force. Remember, half the population is under age 15. This is one structural accounting for that low labor force participation rate. Let's say we're dealing with 25 million Mexicans in the labor force. We'll up it a bit. Okay? Now, what's the unemployment in Mexico right now? If you add together open unemployment and group the underemployment to add up to an unemployment number, what do the Mexicans say it is? They say it's 50%. So you're dealing with roughly 12 to 13 to 14 million Mexicans economically active who are working. Now, how many illegals are there in the United States from Mexico? What are the estimates? Anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 million, something on that order. Let's say 5 million. Now, if you draw a unit equivalency, employed Mexicans in Mexico, and given a roughly three times at least, wage differential in the U.S., you might be dealing with 15 million units in the U.S. This is more than just a safety valve for Mexico, much more. You might be dealing with 15 versus 15 million, something that great. In addition, you have the largest number, not number, but in percentage terms or proportion, however you want to look at it, people coming into the labor force in Mexico greater than in any other Latin American country each year. These are demographic chickens 15, 20 years later coming home to roost. You've got your 50% unemployment rate, and I'll make a stab at it. I think it's somewhere on the order of 700,000 to 800,000 Mexicans coming into the labor force each year. But industries are not nearly absorbing the population. Of course, the service sector is doing what it can, and agriculture is growing a little bit. But I'm afraid in the trade-off between the commercialization of agriculture and the desperate need to grow foodstuffs, in that trade-off, and the need to provide labor-intensive agricultural employment, that at best you might increase those in the ag labor force a little bit, but nowhere near the number that need to be employed. This stream will migrate to the cities. Industry, again, not absorbing many at all. You're left with the service sectors. Now, if the bucket is spilled over in the rural sector, which it really has, and the bucket has spilled over in the urban sector, which it really has, what do? Do you sit on your hands? No. You go north. If you study these figures, look at them just for a while, you understand very clearly, I think, what this illegal migration issue is all about to the U.S. Have I answered your question?
Yes, could you make a few comments on Cuba and its success or failure, for example, since 1960 in alleviating this problem of, well, as I understand it, Cuba has had some success in, for example, slowing the growth of Havana and balancing demographic increase of regional cities?
I haven't looked at that. I believe that has been the case. Yes. Yes. That there's, somewhat like the Dominican Republic in the Trujillo days, you didn't move from the country to the city. You weren't allowed to. But on the positive side, I believe I understand a very deliberate effort has been made to keep them down on the farm and to promote secondary cities, but I don't have the facts and figures to go with it. Sir?
You quoted some impressive statistics suggesting the population explosion that is occurring and is expected to occur in Latin America. My question is, what efforts are the governments making in terms of land reform, in terms of absentee ownership of land, in terms of the vast concentrations of land held by the church and not being worked, especially in view of the fact that you've got to feed these people somehow?
Well, again, it depends on the country. One wouldn't really worry about that situation in the Southern Cone. If you were dealing in equitable terms, perhaps you might. To feed the cities, the Southern Cone exports grains. They'll continue to export grains. Peru went through a period of revolution in the 70s. There was a large agrarian reform there. I would find it hard to get into it on a case-by-case point. The winds of change are not with us, let's put it that way. What we saw as the Alliance for Progress in the 60s kind of died out by the late 1960s, and that has not been revised at all. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, of any large-scale agrarian reform, effective agrarian reform in the last 10 or 15 years. Every now and then you read about one, but you scratch the surface and there's really nothing there. We read about one in El Salvador in the last 6 months, but that has not as yet been implemented. And your guess is as good as mine as to the winds of change in El Salvador at this point. By the same token, this case takes us off the track a little bit. We see an awful lot of lands that would otherwise perhaps be redistributed turned over to cattle production, don't we? Every time we bite into a McDonald's hamburgers, you might think about that province of Guanacaste in Costa Rica that ecologically has been pretty well destroyed, all right, where land concentration has occurred and it's been turned over to cattle land, not small parcels for small farmers, which otherwise might have occurred. That's another, of course, that's a very vast subject. I firmly recommend the book by Norman Myers, The Sinking Ark, the whole question of the disappearance of species and the disappearance of tropical hardwood forests and the interlocking nature of that subject with population, etc. Well, I'd be very happy to answer on behalf of the World Bank where I don't work. The most interesting thing I've seen in a long time, was an appraisal of the success. This was an appraisal done about 3 years ago of the World Bank in approaching the population problem. Now, the World Bank has come out very strong on this issue with McNamara's speech, was it at Notre Dame, 10 years ago, and it's tried very hard to operationalize these concepts. 8 years later or so, Burleson came in with a group of people from the Pop Council in New York, and they analyzed the success of the World Bank. One thing I saw that really struck me was a list of the kinds of operations that the World Bank was very successful in. It was a list of some 10 or 12 items, building roads, dams, etc., secondary education. And next to it on the other side was a listing of those actions which seemed to lead, as directly as possible, to reduced fertility. And the point was, never the twain shall meet. What the World Bank apparently did for a living was not remotely associated with the kinds of operations that, if undertaken, would lead to reduced fertility. It seems to be something they're still struggling with. How do we do it? We want to do it. This is the ideal. Now, how do we operationalize it?
Do you see any change in the role of the Catholic Church population growth in Latin America in the next 20 years?
No. But on the other hand, is it the church that the Latin Americans are truly concerned with on this issue? It's perhaps maybe the governments themselves. Again, country after country. What country are we talking about? You wouldn't raise the issue as pertains to Argentina or Uruguay, would you? You certainly would as pertains to Colombia and Ecuador. No, but you certainly would not in the case of Mexico. Now, I might point out that many Latin American countries have come out very strongly in favor of family planning programs. Mexico is foremost among them. This is overt. It has been covert in certain countries. The Organization of Medical Doctors in Colombia in the 1960s, which has led to a rapid decline in population growth. It depends on the country, overt, covert, but a lot of countries, yes, the national governments have come out fairly strong. Sir?
Is there any indication in countries where there's a decline in growth in terms of population? Is there any indication that where there's a decline, there's an improvement in standards of living or quality of life?
Oh, golly. There are 100 ways to approach that. Let's try Costa Rica. In that case, the population growth rate, which was 4%, equal to that of Kenya today, the highest in the world today, in the around 1960, has dropped to 2.5%. And what it's done is to produce a population pyramid that now looks a little like this, and that has resulted in more teachers available to teach elementary school children. An awful lot of teachers out of work in Costa Rica, as I understand. In that sense, yes, there's been improvement. The problem we complain about at home in Montgomery County is the size of our classrooms, no? That is 29 kids per teacher. In Costa Rica, they've been able to alleviate that issue a little bit. Yes, there's been improvement in that context. All right, one issue. If you need an overall statement from me, I really can't give it to you, because I'm not too sure we have the devices to measure qualitative improvements, overall improvements as a direct result of falling fertility. I don't think anyone's really done that yet. If anyone would care to disagree with me on that, I'll join the issue. Sir?
Do you have any information on the other side of this as to the demographic data on the middle class versus the lower class?
Not a lot, really. I'm boggled by the number of countries I'm involved in, and whether a statement I would give you would be applicable to a Latin American middle class or a Latin American lower class. Also, you'd have to take into account differentially falling mortality.
Could we take the big cities of the eastern rim then of Brazil, Argentina?
Why don't we try just one country? To compare Brazil and Argentina, it would take an awful long time. As I understand it, and I'm going out on a limb here, again, you're talking about half a continent, Brazil, 100 and some million people, where the attitudes are far different in the northeast than they are in the southern part of the country, as different as, say, perhaps Canada and Haiti, the two parts of Brazil, perhaps an exaggeration. To answer your question, it would appear, yes, as though fertility is greater among the lower classes than among the middle classes. But in terms of survivability, each may have, on average, total fertility 4 children. More survive in the middle classes. They may have had, in the lower classes, 8 live births. Now, something in that order. 4 survived. But the answer is yes, there's a higher fertility among lower classes.
This program here says U.S. help the Development Bank to develop their population programs. What are the
Well, the correct way to look at that is that the bank does not begin programs. The countries request the bank for loans. We loan, on average, something on the order of $2 billion a year. This comes about as through country requests. Now, should a country ask us for a population program, we'll look at it, we'll study it. There's one in the works right now from Brazil. Should a country, as many have, ask for health loans with a family planning component, we make, in many cases, health loans. I think there have been something on the order of 8 or 9 in the last 2 years. We're dealing with tens of millions of dollars, essentially for rural health clinics. This is the kind of population program we have. It's not called, it's not ballyhoo to the world. It just evolves very slowly at the request of national governments. The point I want to make is, yes, we have a population program dealing directly with fertility issues, with maternal and child health care, but we don't go out and beat the bushes and develop something ourselves. This is simply the attitude of the bank. This is the bank policy.
Mr. Fox, we'll take one more question.
Sir?
I'd like to know what you see happening in Latin America in the year 2000 when it has a population between 500 and 600 million. Will there be starvation? Will there be massive revolution?
Well, one of the things I can see clearly, and it doesn't take a crystal ball, is again, people don't sit on their hands. How many Colombians are in Venezuela? How many Paraguayans are in Argentina? Chilenos in Venezuela? They go to the labor markets. I see an awful lot of that happening, that Latins will simply pack up and go to another country. And like anything else, there are mechanisms. It's not all or nothing. There are partial solutions here or there. That I kind of skeptical on the food production side of it, because I don't think that's going to bring about much of a revitalization affecting great numbers in rural Latin America. But I see food production starting up, yes, that I do. The bottom line to me would be a Latin America, as we stated, of some 475 million city dwellers. Perhaps as analogous to the descent into the seventh city of Dis out of Dante, in rather unspeakable conditions, but as one result of that, perhaps, of real acute pressures on the family system, as one result of that, perhaps a very rapid decline in fertility trends as they become acculturated to urban living and the desire for more education, that sort of thing. It may be quite possible that we see a very rapid decline in fertility, but with most of the population in the cities, and the larger farms taking care as best they can with food production in rural areas. That's my crystal ball. Sir? We have one more. I'm sorry, I can barely... Well, now let's back up a little bit. What's the population of Lima? Some 5 million. Hey, I don't see revolution there. What's the population of Mexico City? 15 million. No, let's turn a little more toward the sociology side of that and discuss the formation of neighborhoods, for example, of cooperatives, of communities, within the city structure. I see that a lot more clearly, and it's obvious. To me it's obvious. I see that as a reality long before I do an idea of chaos, simply because of the numbers of people in an urban setting. They organize themselves like anybody else. This is their situation. They've got to live with it. No, I don't see Armageddon as a basis. It's simply based on a... Perhaps it may come about as a result of other items. 50 years of an elitist system, at least 50 years in El Salvador, for example. Now, is that a demographic movement? I don't know. It may be as a result of a feudal system which has operated for an awful long time. I would not hazard a guess calling many things demographically based, leading directly to what you're suggesting. It's risky to talk that way anyway. No, I'd get off my area of expertise. I don't really want to do that. Okay.